Hello, everybody. We're getting together here to talk about the agreement of sale. We are starting at line 281. I'm going to do a share screen so that we can all be on the same page. And if you're here in person, you should see that up there in front of you. I'm going to slide all this extra stuff out of the way. And line 281, if you don't have something in front of you, is real estate disclosure law. So I would like this to be a give and take. I would like this to be a cooperative experience. It makes it easier and better for all of us. What is our obligation, as the listing agent when it comes to the seller's property disclosure? Anybody can start the ball rolling.
To make sure everything's filled out.
That's right. Let's get it filled out. Like, let's get it. It's the seller's job under the law of the land of the state of Pennsylvania to complete a seller's property disclosure. Whether or not it's a private sale or not, there are the exclusions that are listed on the front there, including husband to wife, foreclosures, if we're selling a property that's going to be demolished, stuff like that. But by and large, except for the exceptions, it's the law of the land that we have to get this disclosure filled out. Do they have to fill out the PAR disclosure?
Nope.
Correct. Is the PAR disclosure is much more thorough than what the state legislature needs, requires to be filled out. The PAR thought that these would be useful items to discuss for a buyer to make an educated decision. Like, what extra stuff do we have in there? Like depth of the well. That's not a requirement, but it's good information, flow of the well, stuff like that. So if somebody's giving you a bunch of bones about a seller property disclosure and all these things, make sure you point out to them, unknown is an acceptable answer. Not applicable is an acceptable answer. Don't make stuff up, but fill it out to the best of your ability. Now, has anybody had experience with powers of attorney, trustees, executors? How do those things fall in when it comes to a seller's property disclosure?
Yeah. Well, to me, if they had knowledge of the property, they fill it out to the best of their ability to indicate if they are the executor.
Correct.
Which is in the front page, they can sign it as you.
Exactly. And
but if they have no knowledge, they have no knowledge.
Power of attorney still needs to fill it out. Executors don't. So it's kind of a trick question.
But that's not really true, because if an executor has knowledge of the property, then they have to indicate that, right?
The first part of the disclosure itself says that they don't necessarily, but should.
It's one of those things where hang on, hold on, folks. It's one of those things where under the law of the land at a greater level, there is a common law obligation to disclose known material defects. So if I know that mom, or grandpa had a failing septic, that's something we need to disclose. If I never lived in the house, okay. If I grew up in that house, you start getting into that gray area. So again, unknown is an okay answer. Generalities are okay. Just have them fill out something. And from a practical standpoint, it's always my opinion that impulsive buyers make impulsive decisions. And if you can give them the information they need to move forward quickly, it's a benefit to the seller. I don't want the seller to fill out stuff by guesswork and put them into a liability situation when it comes to one of these, gray areas. Now, that's the seller's job, is to fill that out. It's the seller's agent job to make sure they fill it out. How's the what's the buyer's responsibility? Has anybody had any experience with that?
Read it.
To-
To actually read it.
To make sure it's complete, and let me tell you why. We have a case, not through our brokerage, but ancillary, like I have awareness of this case, that a buyer's agent is doing depositions. They are in court. They are paying an attorney to handle their side of this case because buyer bought the property, couple boxes weren't filled out, neither yes nor no. And they didn't ask the question of the listing agent, why wasn't this done? They didn't draw this, they didn't draw their buyer's attention to that. And they were quote unquote negligent in their responsibilities to draw their client's attention to that incomplete form.
Hmm.
So is this generally a problem? No, but it's never a problem till it's a problem. I mean, I can go through just about every any transaction and find something that somebody could, make a big deal out of. Generally, we don't have that, but we want to make it as airtight as possible. So, who needs to fill these out? Not vacant land, residential units, 1 to 4. What if it's a mixed use property? Say a storefront on the street and apartments above. There's a residential component, so it needs to be filled out. Okay? If it's a,
So is that filled out then according just to the residential? Like if there are issues within the commercial property, they don't have to disclose those on the residential? If
Over
they're
dis-
not tied?
over disclose, I would say, make a disclaimer, get it in writing somehow. Now, if you have a vacant land with a garage on it, don't have to fill it out because it's not residential. So residential is the defining thing. Sorry, Cindy. Now, public and private assessments. Does anybody have an idea what a public or a private assessment is? Let's read. Seller represents that as of the date the seller signed this agreement, no public improvement, condominium, or homeowner association assessments have been made against the property, which remain unpaid. We're going through a situation in a local development here in the Carlisle Borough, where significant repairs had to be made because of bad flashing around drive-it. EIFS, exterior insulation finishing systems, caused damage to the property. There was a assessment made on each resident in that community, whether or not they were affected, to the tune of $15,000. And there is a lawsuit going on right now because of that. So, in these assessments may or may not have been paid. You need to pay attention to what these are. What are some other assessments that might be happening out there, folks? Either public or private.
Public sewer is coming through your street.
Public sewer is coming to your neighborhood, or sidewalks coming in. Great. Now there's a time period there. And we'll talk about that later, but that comes up here. That can change the entire geography of the deal if you have a $150,000 house and they're expected to put in $10,000 worth of sewer. What about highway occupancy permits? Anybody have any experience with those things? Township guy, Mike?
Yes, depends on who owns the road.
Depends on who owns it. Could be the township, could be the state. If it's township, it's pretty much, it's pretty easy.
Very simple.
Yeah, if it's PennDOT, you have to file an application. You might need a survey. You might even need a traffic study. Yeah,
What would a scenario be for that?
vacant land. Generally, if there's a house, there's all,
What you're gonna do to it?
Adding a
It's
driveway.
vacant land?
well, if
Like
you
you're
have,
Build a house, build a store.
if you have a house, there was already a driveway permit in most cases. If there's a mailbox, there's probably already a driveway permit and you're not gonna have to worry about that stuff. The only time that you usually have to worry about a highway occupancy permit is if there's a change in use or you're doing some construction. So let's say I'm selling a vacant lot and they're gonna build a house on it.
Right.
There's no mailbox.
Right.
You're gonna need to be able to access the property. And they want to make sure that that driveway goes at a spot that can be seen from either, either end of the road.
Okay. I thought it was something more than, I thought it was something other than that.
Nope, that's it.
If you get into higher category, like under commercial business or something like that, and that's where he was talking about a traffic impact study.
Trips per day.
Yeah. What's going in there, what's it gonna be utilized for, and then they will come back, I think it's a year, roughly a year after, and see if you're consistent with the traffic impact study they did.
And that's like really all through the township, right?
No.
So like, well,
No, it's a state road.
right, but what I mean is, like, I'm gonna go buy a house, I'm gonna go buy vacant land. And and it's like commercial, like our class yesterday, and I'm gonna put some sort of something in there, something big.
Okay.
And my first step is gonna be to get approval from the township, and then they're gonna tell me, well, you have to have this, and this.
Yeah, you're gonna get zoning
Right,
approval, but the occupancy is based on the road you're on. So if you're on 11 and 641 on the state run, you're gonna have to go through PennDOT.
Yep.
For the occupancy.
So if there's,
How am I gonna know that?
if depending on the color of the sign,
The township you're in, what you end up having to do is submit a subdivision and land development plan.
Right,
You also talk to the township and they'll discuss, okay, what can go in there, what kind of variances, what kind of conditional uses are you in? There's a whole slew. First place you start with is the town, whatever municipality owns that
right.
jurisdiction.
And this just ties into yesterday, because there's a lot of discussion about uses and that kind of thing. And
Yes.
I'm just thinking to myself, as a total rookie on commercial, what would I do? Well, first thing I'm gonna do. is-
Refer it.
Well. Anyway, all right. I'm done with this conversation with you.
It covered a little bit more from yesterday's conversation also. When you go to the zoning ordinance to see what you can do there, the very first thing you need to do is read the definitions. Definitions are gospel when it comes to any of those kinds of things, because they might say home use, what kind of home use, and it'll describe in there what they consider a home or no impact or low impact, but read the definitions of what they say everything is.
Mhm. I would think that would probably be the only interesting thing about commercial. It's just how you deal with.
Is
townships
everything.
and Zoning, and I mean, that would be super interesting, I think.
Do you live in West
Anyway.
Pennsylvania?
Internet of,
Do you live in West Pennsylvania?
let's talk about the Internet of Things. Has anyone experienced the Internet of Things? What is the Internet of Things, everybody?
Ring doorbells,
Ring doorbells,
security systems.
security systems, thermostats, toasters, light bulbs, fireplaces, anything that you might be able to turn on with your phone. I mean, there are smart receptacles that I can be on vacation or at work, and I can adjust the temperature of my thermostat if I had that hooked up, but I don't.
You could open your garage door.
I could open my garage door, I can unlock my house, I can turn on my lights, I could have something that would feed my dog a treat.
You leave your dog alone home that whole time?
As long as there's got a thing for the tree.
Clark's very mature, but so that's what's going on. So what is our obligation here as the seller?
To make people aware of it.
Make them aware of it
Clear all the data.
and to clear the data to make sure that we are disconnected. So that if the sale goes badly, seller moves to Florida and they're still changing the thermostat on the new homeowner, that can be done. They could still be watching the Ring doorbell. That's creepy and not okay.
Prove that that's what I was gonna ask, because what proof do you get of this?
There's no way to really prove it.
Everything's just good faith.
It's good faith, or make sure that those manuals are available and that your buyer can go in there and clear those caches, clear those cookies
I'm a
and
big fan of it being on both sides of the contract though, because then you don't have to worry about it either way.
Yeah.
It's up to-
You're
right,
gonna be listening now, so it has all that stuff, so I never thought about the thermostat.
right.
I thought
I
it was
recommend
doorbell.
making sure that all those manuals are available. And that the buyer knows how to reset to factory settings. Whenever they reset those, then it'll boot everybody off.
So it's partly on the buyer.
Theoretically, and I say theoretically, whenever you go in and put in a new Wi-Fi to the house, the past owners shouldn't be able to hook up, but because it's all on the same Wi-Fi, but there's the possibility, and I have heard of it happening.
Or I've already had the discussion with sellers of, do you plan to take that stuff with you? Let's go ahead and put that in bold now that all of this will be removed.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I haven't had anybody who wanted those things to stay. They wanted their own
It's kind
stuff.
of, yeah.
Yeah, but the thermostat, you're not gonna yank a thermostat.
You could though,
It's pretty easy.
You could. My thermostat just looks like a regular old Honeywell that I could hook it up if I was too lazy to walk upstairs to adjust the air conditioning. But I just leave it. What's one other thing that we need to be aware of with the Internet of Things?
Audio, video recording.
Yeah, audio video recording is a big one. I don't let clients talk in houses.
Because they're not supposed to, right? That's against the law to.
It's against the law. I'm sure it doesn't happen ever, but so
It's only against the law.
If you get caught.
for recording,
Because
right?
They are fully within their rights, even according to the contract, to just listen the entire time.
Yeah.
Right.
So they just can't record it.
So they can know it, but they can't prove it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, any questions before we dive into the due diligence menu? Super fascinating stuff. I'm sure we're gonna have some riveting conversations on this.
Good stuff.
Seller will provide access to insurers' representatives and, as may be required by this agreement or by mortgage lenders, to surveyors, municipal officials, appraisers, and inspectors. In addition, unless otherwise agreed, only parties and their real estate licensee may attend any inspections. Isn't that interesting? Who's the number one person who's going to try and come along on that home inspection? Daddy, the deal killer. Because dad knows about these things. He used to be in construction.
To be a contractor.
He used to be a contractor. I showed a property the other day that was on the seller's property disclosure, expertise of seller, contractor, worst property ever. Just because you, yeah, just because you says you are, doesn't mean you are.
It's because you never have to work on your
That's
own
right.
shit.
Yeah.
Right.
It needed some work.
Exactly what it is.
So what happens? What do we do, guys? If daddy, the deal killer, the cousin who's writing the check as the gift, donor, what happens if they want to come along?
You have that discussion ahead of time.
Yeah, this is a really tough discussion to have. And this really, you have to be the diplomat to make this go. You need to know when to employ the other side of the aisle so that you don't be the bad guy. Like if I'm the buyer's agent, I've got, Cindy and Tommy, they're first-time home buyers. Daddy, the deal killer, the former contractor wants to come along. Grandma, who's writing the check as the gift fund donor, wants to come along. I mean, we've got a whole entourage that want to come to this home inspection and talk about drapes. And that's not the idea. So how do we have that discussion and not destroy our relationship with our buyer? Blame it on the seller. No, I don't know. What do we do? I mean, we have to be a diplomat here,
You're paying for that home inspector's time
right?
to learn about your home. This
Yep.
is the perfect time to know how to maintain your home and learn all the inner workings, and you need to be focused with your home.
Let's not put the
inspector.
cart before the horse. Let's get past this, then we can talk about drapes on our next walkthrough.
And if your dad really wants to be along, he can't, but he can read the home inspection. I'm sure you'll allow him to talk to the home inspector.
Right?
That's as far as it's gonna get.
I don't want you to be distracted from the,
Yeah,
the discussion that we're having here. That's happening.
But you have the discussion right when you're doing the contract.
Yeah.
That's.
That's-
Yeah, it's when you
In
tell
theory, yeah,
them.
but once you're under contract, they forget that because everybody wants to see it. It doesn't really.
Yeah, my dad
Remember-
really wants to see it. All right.
If you can't see it, we
Like,
shouldn't buy it.
We totally. did
tag
that.
along like at the first pre-settlement walkthrough, because you're gonna have two pre-settlement walkthroughs, so. You can't come to the inspection, Dad, but like next week, we can go for our first pre-settlement walkthrough, and
Oh,
then you can tag along.
I don't want them there then.
Yeah, still it has to be just the buyer, you can't do that either.
Yeah, buyer makes 2 pre-settlement walkthrough inspections of the property. For what purpose?
To make sure it's in the same.
For the limited purpose of determining that the condition of
right.
the property is as required by this agreement and any addenda. Buyer's right to these inspections is not waived by any other provision of this agreement. So if you waive the home inspection, can you still do 2?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure thing.
If the seller says it's fine, then you get permission for another walkthrough, then it's okay, right?
Yeah.
As long as the seller's on board.
I don't want everyone to get too comfortable with occupying this property before they own it. Because
Right.
then you start to take ownership and some lines get blurred. Invariably, it happens. Can I move some stuff in? I did this, I made this mistake. More recently than I'd like to admit, where the buyers were in a really tough situation. They were selling their house and they had a pre-settlement possession addendum to move stuff in the garage. I get a call from an irate seller that they have moved into the house. And I went and I talked to the buyers. I said, you moved into the house. Well, you said that you talked to the seller. I said, they misconstrued. Give an inch, they'll take a mile. So be careful which inch you give because they're going to run with it.
You throw 'em out.
No, we had to negotiate a full pre-settlement possession where they leased the whole property and then they ended up moving in whole hog. So.
Buttons, buckets.
So, seller will have heating and all utilities, including fuels, on for inspections and appraisals. Anybody have this happen?
This week.
What happened?
Definitely.
Melinda, there's Melinda. All right.
Winterization.
Yeah, so you've got a down on their luck seller who they'd rather step over $1 than, or they'd like to screw this deal up in as many ways as possible by shutting off the power immediately,
Or run the furnace empty.
running the furnace empty. And it just costs more for everybody in the long run, right? So let them know that it's their job to keep the pipes from freezing the whole way until closing. All inspectors, including home inspectors, are authorized by the seller to provide a copy of any inspection report to the broker for the buyer. It says it right here so that we don't have problems with it. And then the seller has the right upon request to receive a free copy of any inspection reports from the party for whom it was prepared. Unless otherwise stated, the seller does not have a right to receive a free copy of any lender's appraisal report. Unless it comes up short on value, then you have to provide that, and that's right in there. So the buyer waives or elects at the buyer's expense. Here's the fun part for me. And this is where I wish my friend Chris Deerdorf was here, because we have had knockdown, drag out fights over this. It says the buyer waives or elects at the buyer's expense to have the following inspections, certifications, and investigations, referred to as inspection or inspections, performed by professional contractors, home inspectors, engineers, architects, and other properly licensed or otherwise qualified professionals. All inspections shall be non-invasive unless otherwise agreed in writing. If the same inspector is inspecting more than one system, the inspector must comply with the home inspection law. So if they're, can you have somebody come by to do a electrical inspection?
Yeah.
Can the same person do HVAC inspection?
Technically, no.
Technically, no.
Not a license?
Whether they have to be licensed as a home inspector.
They have to be licensed as a home inspector theoretically.
If they're
Because a
doing more
separate
than one
person who was
component.
licensed
If they're
as a
doing
home
more than
inspector.
one system, if they're doing more, can you have a contractor come by and do a home inspection?
If he subs each one, huh?
Like technically, I'm licensed for HVAC, plumbing, and electric, but I couldn't go in and check everything for your house because I'm not an inspector. I can do one of the three, but not all three, or even two.
Okay, so that's something to be aware of. Okay. For elected inspections, the buyer will, within the contingency period, complete the inspections. This confuses a lot of people to this day. Complete the inspections, obtain any inspection reports or results, and accept the property, terminate this agreement, or submit a written corrective proposal to the seller according to the terms of paragraph 13B. We're going to skip ahead. Well, no, we won't. We'll touch on it. Let's talk about the different options we can have here. So a home inspection. What may be inspected on a home inspection?
Full home inspection, anything that you can. It just can't be invasive, like they can't go through in walls and things like that.
Structure and all the systems.
Structure and systems, sure. What else do they have on there? Indoor or interior, exterior plumbing, sewer systems. So you can run the camera. You can do the appliances. You can do the hot tubs, the spas, the swimming pools, downspouts, fascia, gutters, electrical systems. I said that already. Electromagnetic fields. Anybody have that done? That's pretty crazy. Wetlands and flood delineation. Seems to me like that would be a separate one, but that's right there on the home inspection. Underground storage tanks, mold. You can have it measured for square footage to verify that. This is where you verify that. Don't come back to me after the fact and tell me the square footage wasn't right. You had the opportunity right here. You waived it. You waived it. Asbestos.
I thought pools were separate. Not separate?
Nope, it's right there.
What you said, pools.
And I thought,
So you have full tilt there. Now, what about wood infestation? That's, why is that separate? Could you elect a home inspection, yet waive the wood infestation and still make a claim under the home inspection for wood infestation?
Sure. Damage.
Other environmental hazards, maybe under that?
Yeah.
From my perspective, you can't generally elect the less specific, but then specifically waive that precise inspection. So I can't say, I agree to inspect everything, but narrowly I'm waiving this one. You waived your right to that more narrowly defined one.
So you can't come back.
so if they found
if you have a
evidence,
radar.
you don't have.
The thing is, you don't have to have the results from the home inspection to come back on anything. I mean, you can, in theory, just do the home inspection, come back and say, I just don't like it. Like, I don't like.
Right.
the
That's
way
true.
that corner of the house looks, and so we're gonna back out, like,
Right,
it's just.
right, but
But if they
but
made
are
it
you
right.
trying to say, I can't have a home, because it's always radon with me. I can't have a home.
Let's talk about radon then.
Waive radon.
Can everybody hear this at home?
Yep.
Waive the radon on the agreement.
Yeah.
Have the home inspection and have the inspector check for radon. The radon's 100. I can't then go back and use that as a part of the reply to inspection.
So
That's
let's fully flesh this out.
the argument.
If you elect a home inspection and waive the radon, and then the home inspector asks me, I see a radon kit sitting in the house and they've waived it, I'm calling them to come take that out of the house because it was waived in the agreement. If they want to test for that later, they can test for that later.
But is
But-
that actually waiving the test? I thought it was waiving the contingency that you're not going to potentially.
What does the contract say? Buyer waives or elects at buyer's expense to have the following inspections. So you waive or elect the inspection.
Okay.
I still think it's. gonna say the
So if you tell me that you're waiving it, and we'll get back to it, but if you're telling me you're waiving it and then you do it, you don't have permission to do it. And you're gonna say, Justin, I swear I'm not gonna negotiate based on that radon. But you found out that you have 100 radon, are you gonna negotiate harder on that broken light switch? Yeah,
Sure.
of course you are.
It's
So
gonna cost $1,000 to have that.
$100,000 light switch. So get that out of my house. Mike,
Condition of the loan.
condition of the loan is totally different.
But if you elect them here not to, but the bank says you have to, so they can still come back and do it, correct?
Yes, because that's a requirement of the lender. As it says right up in here, as a requirement of the mortgage lender.
To the best of my knowledge, nobody who's walked over a radon number has ever not won their case in Pennsylvania, even if the number is 3 and they decide to walk, even though our number is 4 DPIs. If the number's 3 and they decide to go, their case.
You don't
will
have to
probably
justify it.
succeed. They can walk.
If it's one.
The old real estate contract, I don't know, you don't have to raise your hand if you remember this contract, but there used to be an option 1 and an option 2 under the home inspection contingency, where you would put a deductible in there. And
Mhm.
if the seller paid for the remediation or the cost of the repair did not clear that deductible threshold, buyer still had to buy it. So radon could, there was at that time a lock-in feature to the agreement of sale that the buyer couldn't walk if the seller offered to fix everything that was wrong.
But with radon, even if it's fixed and it shows 3, the case is in court. It's my understanding that no buyer has ever lost the right to walk without penalty if the radon doesn't make them happy.
Oh, after mitigation.
Well, that's after mitigation.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So let's talk about deeds, restrictions, and zoning. The buyer may investigate easements, deed and use restrictions, including any historic preservation restrictions or ordinances that apply to the property, and review local zoning ordinances. The buyer may verify the present use of the property, such as in-laws quarters, apartments, blah, 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 blah. Can we think about a time where this might be, has anybody had any issues with the deeds, restrictions, zoning contingency?
I did. It was on Graham Street, where Graham Street was a 2-unit.
Okay,
And so I put it on the market
as a 2-unit.
as a 2-unit, and I'm reading the deed and I'm thinking, okay, so I call the borough,
Mm-hmm.
because I think there's some kind of like landlord inspection thingy.
Yes.
Right, so I just called, we sort of figured out. And they're like, well, you can't have 2 units on Graham Street. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's a 2-unit. And they're like, but you're not allowed to do that.
It was not a use permitted by right.
That's right. So I had to take it off the multi-list as a multi-unit
Mm-hmm.
and sell it as just a residential.
Anytime you see something in your seller's property disclosure or the deed that you pull up that alludes to an easement or a restriction that you're not familiar with, and you can't get a clarifying explanation that satisfies your buyer, I recommend, at least presenting the option of this contingency. This will give you time to do a title search, and that title search is going to tell you all about the deed restrictions that only are alluded to in the current deed. Because a lot of times those deed restrictions are 3 deeds deep. And the current deed says, with all rights, restrictions, and appurtenances, and they're gonna make a reference to a prior deed.
I can't believe that that's allowed. Like, my brain says, if there are restrictions, they should have to be spelled out.
I agree they should.
On the current deed.
Yeah.
Sure.
Why does anybody have to dig
With the
25 years?
If there's a subdivision plan, a lot of times there's conditions to that subdivision. Has anyone ever seen a subdivision plan? And you got all the lines, numbers, you can't tell what anything is. You're not even sure if you have it right side up. And then you've got something in 1-point font, and those are the most important letters associated with that property. It might have stuff on there like you need to install stormwater management basins at the front and the back of the property, that no tree over 6 inches may be removed from the property without prior approval of the conservation district, that the driveway has to be a mile long. I mean, there might be the most, that you cannot dig out a weed without a bog turtle study. Those things exist on here, on those things. And if you have questions about any of those, especially if it's raw land, make sure that you elect this so that you can get that stuff and check it out. They may not be readily available to you, or they may, but even if you can get them and you don't know how to interpret them, have the discussion about checking that stuff out.
One of the things that continue on with that, even though they put it on the subdivision plan, a lot of times they'll say this must be added to lot B to their deed. They won't transfer to the deed. So if you have a deed that doesn't have all the restrictions for the subdivision plan.
That's why you look for the plan.
That's why you look for the plan, because the attorney, they're not pulling the plan, and they're the ones who provide that description.
Reference.
Yeah,
Not all-
yeah, they're probably not gonna reference, they're gonna reference the existence of a subdivision plan and restrictions on a book and page. That's a totally separate document from this deed.
But you're saying sometimes they don't even do that.
I know for a
The
fact. they
subdivision
don't.
plan
Yeah.
will say this is supposed to happen, but then it never happens.
Yeah.
So the only real record of it is on the subdivision plan.
What about water service, guys? What are we testing for? What is water service? Buyer may obtain an inspection of the quality and quantity of the water system from a properly licensed or otherwise qualified water and well testing company. If and as required by the inspection company, at the seller's expense, will locate and provide access to the on-site or individual water system. The seller will restore the property to its previous condition at the seller's expense. So what are we testing here? Is this wells only? This could be municipal as well. This could be community water system. What are we testing for?
Anything?
Quality and quantity.
Is Kristen ready?
Kristen Murray is online, or she was.
She had a fun story a couple years ago about.
I'm here.
Did you have a fun story about water service?
Yeah. Sharon, are you talking about Amberson, the well?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. That was the learning experience.
I vaguely recall. What happened?
It's very clear. It was one of these things where I did a walkthrough. She was selling her property, and we did not locate the well. As a walkthrough, I knew where the septic was, but we didn't know where the well was, and our offer had a well situation. And to me, at that time, it was just like, oh, okay, we're just going to test the well water and, just get that from the faucet. And, no, they wanted in it. So not knowing this, they said, well, we're going to have to dig up the well. So I had visions of this huge well tank having to come out of the ground and whatever. Anyway, they dug it up. It was all fine. But yes, it was, I will never again leave a listing appointment without knowing exactly where the well is. Ever.
Don't make promises you can't keep. My
I
first,
want to know where it is because I thought, oh yeah, seller at seller's expense, and everything was fine. But yes, it was a scary week.
my first experience with this was similar. I was representing buyers on a property. It was a 200-year-old farm and the well was a hand dug well. It was 35 feet deep.
God.
What do you need to know about a 35-foot well? Somebody who's peeing in the bushes by the garage, it's winding up in the well because it's only 35 feet deep. Somebody wanted to know the capacity or the production of this well. So the home inspector, well, if you take it out of the faucet, you're not testing the production of the well, you're testing the velocity of the well pressure tank or the pump, not the production of the well. So there's a whole nother set of things. You have to pump that well and then measure the recharge. Just beware of what you're asking whenever you get in, or what's being asked of you whenever you get into this. If a buyer is requesting this, ask the questions. What are they testing? Are they just testing for bacteria, or are they trying to determine the production of that well? We don't think of it, but this is the hardest thing to quantify on a property that has a well. Some agents in our Selinsgrove office sold a house where the well went dry. And
Yeah, we bought it and the well went dry.
the well went dry. So what'd you do?
Well, we were mad at the seller, but the seller, yeah, pictures. It was after a closing.
So you dug
Dug another well.
and how much was the cost of drilling a new well?
6,500, I believe.
6,500.
My husband ran it, so we didn't pay them run to connect.
Right. You're usually 6,000 to 10,000 bucks. It could go extraordinarily deep. It
Was
could.
it like right after settlement?
Yeah, that we found out, yeah, it was right after.
So these
Mine happened
things,
3 months,
the-
4 months later, so.
you might have had something where the well casing, where the well itself was not fully cased. A lot of times when you're up on the mountain, they can't get 400 feet of casing down there. So they're going to case the top and the bottom. If it's in sand, it might have a tendency to collapse. I know areas where they, on the south side of Cumberland Valley, where there's a lot of sand and these casings, they just, they'll start drawing mud and then they fall in and you're done. But, your well, it might test great tomorrow and then the quarry up the road decides to open up a new vein. And they blast and now your well's dry. Whose fault's that? Nobody. And it's impossible to quantify. It's impossible to guarantee. So wells are a little bit funny.
Well, wells also, you have the depth of the well. Mine's 150 feet and it's down into rock. But then you have the depth of the water. Where do we have water level? That was at 125. So they went deeper, which was a good thing. And then there's the issue of recapture. If the well goes dry, and it's only ever happened once and it was my fault. If the well goes dry, how long does it take to fill back up to its normal, in this case, 125 feet? That's the recapture rate. And that's as important in many ways as the velocity of the water, the gallons per minute that you can get.
Let's talk real quick about what happens when you have fecal coliform in your well water tests. What are you? So who here, raise your hand or sound off. Have you ever shocked a well?
Yes.
Don't ever let me hear you about shocking a well. For a real estate transaction, you're gonna shock your own well. I don't care. But that is something that is risky because you're adding chlorine to a system. The foot valve on a lot of these is rubber. You add too much chlorine, it deteriorates the foot valve. Now you're not paying for just a water treatment system, but you're paying for a new well setup. That's much, much more. It's just a whole messier situation. And you could be evading the results that you're trying to, you could be influencing the results here you could be covering up something that would open you up to a lawsuit down the road. If that's not treated correctly. So be careful about shocking a well. If somebody suggests that, say, hey, I know a great water treatment company that can handle this whole process for us, and give them a call.
I had one time that Matt Fritz went out and did the water test, and he said they must have just bleached it or shocked it, but they dumped bleach down it
You smelled
because
it?
well, no, he couldn't get an accurate I guess the test showed it. And so I told the sellers, you have to pay for another water test for us.
Yep.
And they had to let the water run for like 2 days or something and then do it. But I thought, like, that's not my buyer's fault that you decided to dump. And these were flippers. They flipped the house.
Yeah.
Like, didn't know any better, but they did it the night before the inspection.
Oh,
and
they
they
did.
They knew what they were doing.
If they were
So,
flippers and they bleached it, they knew
so,
exactly what
so
they were doing.
here's, yeah,
didn't
and
do
they
it
probably
earlier.
dumped it right into the
They
well.
just didn't do it
Right.
earlier.
So
They did.
what,
admitted
there is
to it.
appropriate time for shocking the lines in a house. You got a vacant house, or it's been under renovation, or you just did a water test and found out the bacteria was bad. It is completely appropriate to fill those lines with chlorine, let them set for a couple of hours, and then flush the whole system and test again. You need to, once you install a UV light, you need to clean the whole system and flush it out and then retest it. If you just because you install a UV light doesn't mean that the water in the pipes is clean. You need to clean all that and then retest it. But that's we could spend a whole day talking about water service. Just be aware. Tricky stuff. Radon. We already kind of beat that. Does anybody have any fun stories about radon?
Yes.
All right, here's a fun one about radon.
No, just because there is a radon system there and it appears to be functioning does not mean that it is actually functioning properly.
Correct.
We had one that we had the buyers, they were from New York somewhere where radon was super bad, so it was a concern, so they wanted to retest just for peace of mind. Good thing they did. It ended up needing 2 whole new systems to get those numbers at an appropriate level.
My house has 2 systems
Well,
in the borough of Carlisle.
this was West Lowther.
West Lather Street.
Mhm.
All right. So what are some things that can influence, if you test on Monday and you test on Thursday, you might have different numbers radon wise, right? What are some things that can influence radon?
When
Weather.
Right. Weather, windows. Let's talk about windows. You open the windows, the seller opens the windows to air the house out. What happens? Creates a vacuum. It's like building a chimney, and it actually pulls more radon out of the ground and is probably going to drive your numbers up. Rain comes down, floods all the pore space in the ground where all that poisonous gas lurks, floods it up and pushes it into the house. So if you have a rainstorm, you're probably going to have higher radon numbers. You're probably going to have higher radon numbers in April than you are July. Right?
altitude,
Altitude or barometric pressure. So there's a hurricane coming. Barometric pressure is low. Suction, it's pulling up, right? There's rain flooding those pore spaces and pushing the gas up, and then the barometric pressure is low. It's pulling that radon up into the house. It's creating a suction. These are all things that can elevate radon readings.
well, elevation level in terms of how high you are above sea level.
Okay.
In this area, the higher you are, the more likely, not guaranteed, more likely you are to have high radon numbers, because radon is in shale deposits, uranium's in shale deposits. It's a gas from uranium. And if the topsoil has washed down into the river valleys are usually very low on radon. Up high where I am, I'm sure, I've never looked, I'm sure my radon level is crazy. We're in shale and we're up high.
I feel like Cumberland County is reverse of
Oh,
that.
okay.
Our experience, anybody in the valley, like out towards Newville, you're gonna have a high radon.
All depends on the bedrock. Yeah, what's
Well,
underlying.
yeah, we're on the limestone side.
All right, right on. More to know than just what you see. My personal favorite, on-lot sewage.
Oh,
I've sworn at least 7 times throughout my career to never sell a house with a septic system again.
interesting, isn't it? No.
So has anybody sold a house to, anybody have a house listed where the septic failed?
Yep.
What do you do? What do you
We're gonna
do? Did you sell, I mean, did you sell the house anyway? Did you have to
Nope.
replace the septic?
It's on the market currently. My people did not know this. They hadn't lived in it for a considerable period, had a septic test. It is not failed. You can live in it. But the testing on both the tanks show considerable deterioration toward failure. So the tanks are going to have to be replaced. So that
let's-
has to be part of our negotiation, and we're showing everybody the testing and the quote.
Let's explore this a little bit. So you're telling me that you got an unsatisfactory result on a or a sewage and septic inspection, yet it isn't failed. Explain that to me.
It's not leaking, but it probably
leaking.
will.
That's
There's
what's
a
known as
crack in a lid
that's
that
what's
is not going to be under pressure.
That's what's known as a regulatory failure.
Yep.
Whenever the poop comes to the surface or discharges directly into groundwater, that is a regulatory failure. So that means, or it doesn't flush, right? If it doesn't flush, it runs back into the house. That's no good. If there's a crack in the tank and it runs directly to the groundwater, that's no good. That's a regulatory failure. Or if you flush it into the yard and then it gets a little swampy and you can smell it, that's a regulatory failure. And that is your SEO. That's when your SEO is going to come out and say that this is condemned. This is not okay. This needs to be replaced. There's a great difference between unsatisfactory on a real estate inspection and a regulatory failure.
Right.
There are tens of thousands of properties between my house and yours, wherever you live, that wouldn't pass a PSMA, that's Pennsylvania Septic Management Association inspection, that would come back unsatisfactory on a real estate test, but are still legal to live in.
Yep.
All right, so there's a big difference there between a regulatory failure and I wouldn't sell it to my client.
Right. And that's what we've got. It's a non-regulatory failure. It's gonna be a problem and needs to be replaced.
So what are the options if it fails and you can't sell the house? Sometimes you can come in there and you can pull out the tank. If the tank's cracked, sometimes you can put in a new tank without messing with the drain field. If the drain field itself is a failure, it's a no-go. Then we need to start talking about perk test. Maybe you don't have enough land. Sometimes to put in the new drain field, the existing well is too close. Now you have to put in a drain field and move the well. That's super fun. So now instead of
Drains on mine.
instead of a $30,000 drain field, you're also talking about another $10,000 well. So this was the case with my cousin's house. The well was within the drain field, basically.
Wow.
I mean, it was like 30 feet away. So we priced it appropriately to get competing offers, and someone bought it without inspections. And we disclosed the proximity of the well. And they said, it's okay. I said, great, good for you.
Wow.
So you need to know what your,
There's no more to the story?
that was it. They bought it. Everybody's happy.
That's on there.
It was common to the area.
Yeah, I had one a couple years ago where, can I say it real quick?
Yeah.
There's one a couple of years ago where it was on the Walnut Bottom Road, it was under an acre, I think it was like under half an acre actually. And the well was in the back, septic was in the front, and the septic failed because the drain field was saturated.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I had Rosenberry, and they, they gave us a couple different options we could do, but my lady was like, I'm not dealing with that, because the biggest problem was there's nowhere else to put it.
Yes.
Like you are so confined that there's nowhere else to put that in the front yard. And so my lady's like, forget about it. So we got out of the agreement because she didn't want to deal, basically. So the listing agent ended up getting an estimate. You had to take it off the market, got an estimate, had to wait a year or so, and it cost like $40,000. I have no idea what she put in, but they put something else in.
Yeah, 40,000 probably an EcoFlow. That's made from coconut husks or sphagnum moss or whatever.
It's kind of really fun.
But I mean, last thing on septics, I had a house that was built on the creek. And we had it on the market. We had an offer. It failed. Failed the septic system. Drain field was saturated. Took it off the market, put it back on the market after doing 0 repairs. And it passed a septic inspection in July.
Different time of year.
Different time of year, different water table.
Hmm.
That's that.
Like, was the first test like after like a heavy rainstorm or something? I mean, it just
Yeah,
seems so.
Yes. I mean, it was April. It was spring thaw. It was just swampy along the mountain creek.
Even if you have an acre, because I had one that was a little bit over an acre, but there were neighbors. So
Right.
the new system, I mean, we're out measuring vents inches to try to keep it away from
Exactly.
the neighbors.
So septics are fun.
Never.
Know what you're talking about. Know where they are. That's as important as knowing where the well is.
If you have buyers looking at buying a place with a septic, can I float a word of caution of be mindful of you have this adorable family looking to buy a home with a septic system from this cute little old lady
Yeah,
who's lived there by herself for 30 years.
yes.
And your cute little family with 5 kids is moving in
It's a different situation.
and they're bound to have issues.
Yes. This is my number one thing. If we're looking at a house that was built prior to 1972 and it's on an acre in the country, anything that you build and put in the ground for 50 years is going to deteriorate. It's got a limited lifespan. And if there's no place to put a replacement septic system, you need to emphasize that to your buyers, because as Diane said, when that septic fails, you can't put the replacement septic in the same location. And you're going to be hard pressed to find a space that's 100 feet away from the well, no matter where you go on that property.
I understand why you can't, because I know of a friend and their drainage field got, I don't know, something happened to it. And so they had this, they called the septic guy, and he's like, well, I can do this for you. And he ended up bringing so what are those things called, big little pellets up,
An aerator.
aerator, and aerated it, and it was fine. So, but that's not legal anymore.
No, it's not
So my
legal.
question is why? What's the big deal?
I don't know.
Okay.
I guess you could rent one, but
Oh, Joe,
property, I don't want to know about it. But property and flood insurance. This was a big deal in our little neck of the woods. In 2010, 11, and 12, we had a string of devastating hailstorms that came through 3 years in a row.
Yep.
Everybody got a new roof, courtesy State Farm or Erie. I got 2 new roofs, and they gave me a bunch of money for both my cars. It was a lot. In 2011, 12, 13, 14, and 15, there was a lot of people shocked whenever they went to buy a house and their homeowner's insurance was much higher than what they expected, because the house that they were buying experienced a claim. or the area that they were in had a rash of claims and those were much higher. That's whenever I first started seeing the property and flood insurance contingency begin to be elected on a regular basis. From a practice standpoint, it's a get out of jail free card. Let me read this. The buyer may determine the insurability of the property. Did everybody catch that? It's the buyer's decision to determine the insurability of the property by making an application for property and casualty insurance. And if they don't like the payment, they can walk away. If you see this on a contract as a seller's agent, just know that is a get out of jail free card.
But there's also a reason to do that because a lot of properties now are becoming uninsurable.
Right.
There's a lot of being.
Just like well, up the river, our friends up there, they have a lot more experience with flood insurance. But Pennsylvania as a whole, I mean, New York, New Jersey, North Carolina, a lot of coastal areas, they've been experiencing this for the past 2 or 3 years. A lot of insurers are stopping writing policies just because it's a losing proposition for them, and they won't write policies. Pennsylvania is starting to experience this more. Those who are writing a lot higher. You know, we all have in our minds, whenever we do our cost estimates, some ballpark idea that we throw in for homeowners insurance. $800 a year. You should think about revising that upwards because insurance is going up. And insurance is not cut and dry. There's not a price for every person to insure one house. Something like 180 individual factors that go into it, including your credit rating, your personal history, the history of the property. So err on the high side. If you've got somebody who's walking the line on affordability, you know, I'd throw $100 a month on there just to make sure that they don't get totally surprised on your average.
And the breed of dog they have.
Right. And your average home. Yeah. And is there a wood stove? If there's a wood stove, they may not get insured.
Another thing you see, we just recently had it is, because everybody has Google now, they can look, quickly see the house and see the property you're looking at buying. We've been asked, well, I mean, like 6 agencies we went to wouldn't insure this property. Then there was one that was, but they were like, okay, well, we'll insure the house, but we're not gonna insure the barn, or we're not gonna insure this. All these other things would have been on your butt to cover if something would have happened.
So
It's something you definitely need to look into, whether before buying it or even making an offer. Why wouldn't they? Because they don't want to take the risk.
yeah. So let's talk about my good friend, Julie Williams. My good friend, Julie Williams, posted online on Facebook that she was showing 5 properties over 482 miles. And this house was located across a bridge, a footbridge, not a bridge, a footbridge. And that they have to, what they have to do, they have to raise the dam to get the gas over to the house. It reminded me of a story near my house on Big Spring Creek, where this house was over a regular bridge, but when a lightning strike set that house on fire, a 200-year-old limestone house, set that on fire, and the fire trucks were too big to cross the bridge. So I know that homeowners insurance policies look grimly if you're too far away from a fire hydrant. But if you can't even get a fire truck there in the case of a fire, your insurance policy might reflect that.
So did they put a bridge in, like a regular bridge? I'm just
I
curious.
don't think
because
Not now, the
I
house
used
burned
to
down.
go-
Yeah, they never.
They couldn't
I
put,
don't think they did.
they didn't, they couldn't put and they couldn't put the fire out.
Across the bridge, nobody's gonna insure it anyway.
Exactly.
The property we were talking about had a dam and a mill on it, and they didn't, and the dams have to be inspected every 5 years. So if there's repairs that need to be made, you're responsible for it. The insurance company is not gonna pay for it. That's one of the reasons why we could not find insurance for this person.
Wow.
Property boundaries. This,
I'm sorry.
go for it.
Just another quick tidbit on insurance. People forget that there's a history that stays with the house.
Mm-hmm.
We had one in Mount Wolf, like a couple of years ago. I think it doesn't matter. It was a couple of years ago. You know, I quote on my cost sheet, the standard, I think I went a little higher because it was a big house, so I maybe did like 1,200. The buyer calls me and says, hey, I am getting astronomical quotes for insurance. Turns out, and you know, in the disclosure, they had said, yes, we had insurance claims, and this is what it was. They were astronomical claims. And it was a brick home, entirely brick home. And they ended up, the lowest quote was like $2,500.
Was it like a 3-story brick, 3 courses wide?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
and
it was beautiful. It was
so
an old home.
an old
You know,
Victorian, the replacement cost, right? If you were building a 3-story brick house, 3 courses wide today, and so they're charging you for the $1 million replacement cost, not the $250,000 sale price.
Right, that was a big eye opener for me. That was our first experience
Yep.
with that one.
Yeah.
That happened to me in Newark. With cute little
So-
Cape Cod.
Property boundaries.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about, guys, when we elect the property boundary contingency? Mike,
That you're actually buying, what you're getting, what you're buying.
but what's title insurance for?
That is just say it. In that case, it's worthless.
Title insurance does not guarantee the quantum of land. This is to verify that you are getting exactly what they say. So the buyer may engage the services of a surveyor, a title abstractor, or other qualified person to assess the legal description, the certainty and location of boundaries and or quantum of land. And most sellers have not had the property surveyed. It's not a requirement here like it is in North Carolina or Virginia, which I think is not a bad idea. Any fences and hedges and walls and other natural or constructed barriers may or may not represent the true boundary line. Hey, maybe the old stump that's the corner of the property as noted in the deed, it's not the stump that's there today. Right?
100 years ago.
And there's a national forest. I think it's national forest, might be a state forest near State College. It's called the it's Allen Seeger National Forest. And it's old growth hemlock trees that 3 men can't fit their arms around. And the reason it exists is because of a discrepancy much like this, where one logging company owned up to the creek on one side and another logging company owned up to the creek on the other side, but they failed to take into account that there was an island in the stream. And a lot of deeds in Pennsylvania read that way. They go up to the stream or the middle of the stream. And, you know, if you really want to be sure what you're buying, this is the thing. Get your cert, Allen Seeger.
If you pull your deeds, it'll have on there and it'll give you a general idea. Never trust your GIS little thing that you pull up, their crap.
Yeah. Pull up your GIS, pull up your tax map, pull up the deed and verify. I mean, you should see a red flag. If you pull all of those, hopefully you'll see if there's anything to be concerned about, but that's no guarantee either. You know, I had a piece of property that I had to sell. The guy who bought it thought he was buying 30 acres, but it wasn't 30 acres. It was only 20. And
You didn't have him do this?
I wasn't involved in it. It was another broker who was at the settlement table trying to convert purchase to acres and said, oh yeah, that's 30 acres. Guess what? It wasn't. Denny.
That's surprising.
Lead paint. What about lead paint? Has anybody ever had to do a lead paint?
I have clients right now who want one, and they're meeting with Matt Fritz right now, who's hopefully talking them out of it.
That's super exciting. Are they doing it? Is it an old house?
It's like 1970
1970.
or
God.
50. It's 50 or 70. It's not old.
Youngsters may have grown up in a house that was built after 1978, but that wasn't an option for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, as my
But I
mom,
didn't even know what to do. And Nathan and I were both looking at each other and we're like, we don't even know what you do with this.
you
Like,
can do it. I did once. I did one lead paint. It was somebody moving down from New York City. All right. And they didn't want to test the inside of the house. They wanted to test the outside of the house because in New York City, there was a real big problem with community gardens planted outside of these large old tenement buildings where the lead paint had peeled from the exterior of the property and accumulated in the foundation planting beds and gave people eating the tomatoes out of these lead poisoning. So they wanted to make sure that that didn't happen to their kids. So, you know,
That's a good story.
people from different areas have different experiences and different perspectives on these things. So we shouldn't necessarily, scoff at the lead paint test. That actually makes sense to me. And I
that
think
does make sense. But what about inside? Is the remedy not just to paint over it?
the remedy, if you have exposed lead paint, I think the EPA standard is to paint 3 times over it with a enamel paint. And if you chip it, paint over it again. If the proper way to do this is make sure that your client is aware and give them the pamphlet.
Is the cost of this, isn't it very expensive?
It's like $75 a test strip or something like that, or $75 a room to get it tested.
Is this like a test you could buy on Amazon and do it yourself once you moved in and then go from there if you had to?
You
Not-
could, but it
not in
specifically
the scope
says
of
if
a-
you're doing that as your inspection, then it's gotta be.
Oh, no, I know. I'm just thinking like, I guess maybe to some people it is a deal breaker.
Yeah, could be.
But that's a good thing that you did though, Claire, was you're having your client talk to the expert.
Yep.
Good job.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, that went off and I couldn't figure out how to get it back on. Notice regarding property and environmental inspections. These are the specialized ones. I'm going to save the best for last. Mold, fungi, indoor air quality. Not as uncommon. I mean, because everybody's scared of mold, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Totally. I mean, it's like, that's the worst 4-letter word in real estate is, mold, because everybody kind of freaks out over it because everybody looks and sees some dark colored stuff on the foundation in the corner and they think it's mold. I'm not necessarily a mold guy. It could be, but it could be what? Could be mildew, could be just dirt, could be dirt that sticks to condensation on an interior wall. So the standard is if it can't be cleaned by routine household cleaning, and if you test for mold, they're going to do 2 tests. They're going to do an indoor test and an outdoor test. And if the indoor reading is higher than the outdoor reading, then you have a problem. That's the standard on mold.
Who are the people that do that around here? I forget their names.
Stoner.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to before.
I always have fun going in a basement and seeing that white fuzzy stuff on a concrete block wall. And I'd reach out and take some of it on my finger and lick it. And the people would panic and say, oh my God. And it's efflorescence. It's simply the calcium salts.
There you go.
That wakes them up.
MJ.
They got to pay attention somehow.
Wetlands. Anybody had any fun with wetlands?
Oh, yeah.
Environmental hazards. This is a catch-all. This could be, we had one, it was, I think it was like 500 tires.
Oh, wow.
Lead road out.
Yes, Leeds Road. And then there was also a disclosure of PCB contamination because it was down the road from a fish hatchery. PCBs or polychlorinated biphenyls are a big cancer no-no. Yeah, so that was a problem.
And tire piles usually give you huge mosquito problems.
Asbestos. What do we do about that?
Is where
Encapsulate.
It's not radioactive, folks. It's a simple mechanical process. It can be done. Cost about $3,000 to do the stuff in a basement usually,
Much duct tape too.
or duct tape and 6 mil plastic to wrap it up or encapsulate it. They also have a plasticized, like a polymer paint that you can slap on it. It turns it into plastic. Now, my favorite, exterior building materials, or EIFS. I think that's the one. Poor or improper installation of exterior building materials may result in damage. And what happens there from bad flashing, it looks great from the outside, looks pretty good from the inside, but it allows water to enter the wall cavity and the framing rots away. The termites get in there and it looks solid from the outside and the inside until the wall falls down. And that's pretty awful.
Over the years and adding mulch to the side of the house and it comes up and same thing.
This is the last thing we'll talk about on the inspection contingency is the 10, 5, and 2. This is my favorite. You have 10 days to do your inspection and get the reply to the seller as the buyer agent. As the seller agent, you have 10 days to receive it. Period. Within the stated contingency period, and as a result of any inspection elected in paragraph 12C, if the results of the inspection are satisfactory, the buyer will present all reports in their entirety to the seller. That's like non-negotiable. They don't have to ask for it. Even if the results are satisfactory to the buyer will still present all reports to the seller. Says it right here. They will accept the property with the information stated in the report and agree to the release in paragraph 28. That's option 1. Option 2, if the results of any inspection elected are unsatisfactory, the buyer will present all reports in their entirety to the seller and terminate this agreement. Or number 3, somewhere in the middle. So didn't used to be that way. Didn't used to be that we had to give those reports right up front, but they added that, and I'm glad.
Well, yeah. I mean,
What if your seller doesn't want the report?
and that's the reason why they make it mandatory now, I believe, it's because.
So
The-
it doesn't matter.
So the question for everyone at
Give
home,
it to the agent, what the agent does with it.
the question for those at home was, what if your seller doesn't want it? And this is our obligation. Your head in the sand is no defense. You're liable to disclose things that you know or reasonably should have known. If a home inspection was done on your listing and something came back, you reasonably should have known the results of that. That's my opinion.
People just don't want to disclose this.
Right. So how long do we have as the seller to discuss this? To make our decision? 5 days is the period that's stated in here, and
After the 10th day.
after the 10th day. So if we get, as a seller, we get the results. We get the results of our inspections after 5 days. How long do we have as the seller to go through this? 10 days. We have
You have
till
to
the,
15th day.
right, we have till the end of the 10 days plus to the end of the 5, no matter what day we get it. What happens if we get it on the 11th day?
Well.
We
if
don't-
you get yours, somebody's gonna.
All bets are off, right?
So sad.
You still-
Because the buyer at that point is technically obliged to take the property in as is condition. Now, the buyer may terminate during, no, we're going to negotiate. We have the contingency period, which is 10 days to inspect, 10 days. We have 5 days as the negotiation period is stated in that. If we can't reach terms within that 5 days, the buyer has an additional 2 days in which to terminate the deal. The buyer may terminate in either the contingency period or the termination period, but technically they are not permitted to terminate during that 5-day period. This is a steel cage match, folks. We're locked in the room. Nobody can leave. Nobody can leave during that 5-day period. You are married together for 5 days. You can leave while you're dating. You can leave after negotiation period, but during that 5 days, this is staying together, okay?
So if someone turns it over at day 11 and you're saying they technically have to accept it as is,
Technically,
then you still have to wait 4 days. If they're like, hey, you're out of contingency, we're not doing anything before, then you can terminate off of it. That's considered your negotiation.
that voids the 5, it voids the 2. If the buyer doesn't respond during the first 10, all bets are off. They're taking the property as is. There is no negotiation period at that point.
So they still can't walk away off of something. Like if they try to put a reply together on day 11 and then the seller's like, you advise your seller, you're like, nope, we don't have to do anything, blah, blah, blah.
Technically correct. Technically correct. From a practical standpoint, have I negotiated deals that were submitted on day 11? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because from a practical standpoint, were they gonna find a way out of it? Yeah. Were they gonna walk anyway and we're stuck with $1,000 EMD? Yeah. Yeah, so it was worth the seller's time to actually negotiate this because they were gonna be stuck with $1,000 EMD rather than $250,000 for selling the house.
Well, and then having to disclose that, whether it came in time or not, then whatever the issues are, you're disclosing. So
Exactly, exactly. So be aware of all this stuff and try to remind your buyer's agent, hey, I need this report there, buddy. Yeah, it's day 9.5. Get it to me by midnight, please. So,
Justin, when there is a septic and they elected for the system to be inspected, do you extend that 10 days?
I
As a
do
buyer?
typically.
Civil.
It depends on the time of the season, Well, in the interest of time and everybody's sanity, let's punt the rest of this discussion till next time. Does that sound good? Anybody have any particular questions they'd like to throw out for the good of the order?
Not about that.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time. Have a great one. See ya.